London, 1599. A cold evening. Along the banks of the Thames, a small gathering of merchants stood huddled together. No king was present, no general, no display of military might. Just a handful of men with a dream burning in their eyes, a dream of spices, silk, and fortune from the distant lands of the East. Queen Elizabeth I granted this group a royal charter to trade with the East, and so the East India Company was born. Not one of them, not even the merchants themselves, had the faintest idea that this small trading company would one day redraw the map of the entire world. This story does not begin with a great conquest. It does not begin with a war cry. It begins with something far simpler, the desire to make a profit. But history has proven, again and again, that the most dangerous empires are never the ones that arrive with swords. They're the ones that arrive with paper and contracts, because their true intentions stay hidden until it is far too late. The company's first ship set sail in 1601, bound for the shores of India and Southeast Asia, not with conquest in mind, but with a simple goal: buying pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. In Europe, these spices were worth their weight in gold, and whichever company controlled their supply could earn unimaginable wealth. In its early years, the company's conduct was humble, almost meek. Its representatives arrived at the courts of local rulers bearing gifts, asking permission to trade, and wherever permission was granted, they built small trading posts, factories, they called them. These were not fortresses, they were warehouses, offices. But with every warehouse, slowly, a small guard detachment followed. And that right there was the point where the tide of history began, quietly, to turn. Because wherever wealth accumulates, the need for protection follows. And whoever picks up a weapon to protect wealth eventually learns to use that same weapon to seize power. This was a lesson the company would learn very quickly indeed. Throughout the 17th century, the East India Company planted its feet along three major coastal regions of India: Surat and Bombay on the west coast, Madras in the south, and Calcutta in the east. In every place, the story unfolded almost identically. The company would ask the local Nawab, Raja, or Sultan for permission to trade, promise to pay taxes, and in return receive a small plot of land to build its warehouse. The Mughal emperor, still powerful at the time, saw no threat in this modest commercial activity. After all, these were merchants, and merchants brought tax revenue, which was good news for the treasury. But one detail was overlooked, a detail that would prove fatal. The company was permitted to keep armed men to guard its warehouses. At first, these were mere handfuls of soldiers, tasked only with defending goods from bandits and pirates. But slowly, these small detachments grew into full armies. The company began recruiting local soldiers sepoys. They were called trained and commanded by British officers. It was a strange and unsettling arrangement. Indian soldiers on Indian soil being prepared by a foreign company to fight against their own countrymen. Meanwhile, in Europe, rival powers had already entered the field: the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, each with its own East India Company, each with its eyes fixed on India's riches. The rivalry stopped being purely commercial. It turned into a quiet war, where every European power tried to use local rulers for its own advantage. The rivalry between the British and French companies erupted into a series of small wars across southern India. And it was in these wars that a young English officer proved his mettle, Robert Clive, a name that was about to reshape the destiny of an entire subcontinent. This was the moment the company first realized that the true source of power in India was not trade, it was political influence and military dominance. And the day that realization took hold, the company's true face began to reveal itself. Bengal, with its fertile land and abundant wealth, was considered India's most valuable province. Within it stood the city of Calcutta, where the British had built their strongest trading post. In 1756, Bengal's Nawab, Alivardi Khan, died, and the throne passed to his young grandson, Siraj-ud-Dowlah. Siraj-ud-Dowlah was an emotional, impatient young ruler, deeply angered by the company's growing power and its fortifications built without permission. He suspected the company was interested in far more than trade, that it wanted political power, and that suspicion was not baseless in the slightest. the Nawab ordered the company to tear down the additional fortifications it had built in Calcutta. The British ignored the order. In response, Siraj-ud-Dowlah marched on Calcutta with his army and seized the city. This is where the event now remembered in history as the Black Hole of Calcutta enters the story. British chroniclers claim that a number of English prisoners were locked inside a cramped cell, where many suffocated to death. Historians remain sharply divided on the truth of this account, and many modern researchers consider it an exaggeration, later used as political justification. But at the time, for company officials sitting in London and Madras, it became the perfect excuse. Robert Clive was sent to Bengal with a large force, ostensibly to retake Calcutta, but the real goal was far bigger, placing a puppet ruler on Bengal's throne, one who would answer to the company. Before the battle even began, Clive took a hidden path. He reached out to disgruntled, powerful men inside the Nawab's own court chief, among them Mir Jafar, the Nawab's own commander-in-chief, who coveted the throne for himself. A secret deal was struck. If Mir Jafar kept his troops idle during the battle, he would be made Nawab once the fighting was done. This was the foundation of betrayal, upon which one of history's most decisive battles was about to be fought. The 23rd of June 1757, a date etched forever into the fate of the subcontinent. On the field of Plassey, along the banks of the Bhagirathi River, two armies stood face to face. On paper, this looked like an impossibly one-sided battle. Siraj-ud-Dowlah commanded nearly 50,000 soldiers. Robert Clive had barely 3,000. If this had been a simple matter of numbers, the outcome would have been obvious. But a battle is never won by numbers alone. The battle opened with the roar of cannon fire, smoke spreading thick across the field, but as time wore on, an eerie silence settled over a large portion of the Nawab's army. Mir Jafar, who commanded the Nawab's largest contingent, ordered his men to hold their ground and not engage. Loyal generals like Mir Madan fought bravely and died, but their sacrifice was in vain, because the rest of the army stood by, watching, numb and unmoved. The moment Siraj-ud-Dowlah understood his own commander's silent betrayal, his courage broke. He chose to flee the battlefield, hoping to find refuge somewhere safe and regroup his strength. But fate had written something else for him entirely. During his escape, he was captured, and on the orders of Mir Jafar's son, he was brutally put to death. A young ruler who had once sat upon the throne of Bengal became, within a matter of days, first a fugitive and then a corpse. What happened that day on the field of Plassey was not merely the outcome of a battle. It was a message, one that would echo for the next 2 centuries, that conquering India required no cannons. It only required weak, purchasable loyalties within. With 3,000 men, Clive defeated an army of 50,000 through nothing more than a secret deal, and so began a chain of events that would redraw the map of an entire subcontinent. After the Battle of Plassey, Mir Jafar was made Nawab of Bengal, exactly as promised. But this was not a throne of power, it was a throne of servitude. Mir Jafar became a puppet ruler, one whose every decision required the company's seal of approval. He was immediately forced to pay the company a massive sum as compensation for the loss at Calcutta, for war expenses, and as personal gifts for senior company officials, Clive included. Bengal's treasury, once counted among the richest in India, began emptying within months. This plunder was not a one-time event, it became a permanent system. The company began collecting taxes from Bengal's lands, but this revenue no longer went toward the province's welfare. It went straight to Britain, or into the personal pockets of company officials. Soon, Mir Jafar himself grew weary of the company's endless financial demands, and when he tried to resist, the company removed him without hesitation and installed his son-in-law, Mir Qasim, in his place. The pattern continued. Whichever Nawab refused to bow to the company's demands was simply removed from the throne. Throughout all this, the people of Bengal bore the worst economic burden imaginable. Crops were seized from farmers by force. Artisans were forced to work for a pittance. And in 1770, Bengal was struck by a catastrophic famine that killed millions from starvation, a famine historians still debate today. Was it merely a natural disaster, or the direct result of the company's greed? The company that once traded in spices was now running the economy of an entire province by its own will, and its priority was profit, never human life. When news of the victory at Plassey and the plunder that followed reached London, the reaction was mixed. On one side, the company's shareholders celebrated profits had climbed higher than ever before. On the other, questions began rising in the British Parliament. Why should a private trading company hold such immense political and military power? Robert Clive, who had returned home carrying enormous personal wealth, faced a parliamentary inquiry over accusations of corruption and abuse of power for personal gain. Though he escaped the charges, the episode proved that even within Britain itself, people were growing uneasy about just how unchecked the company had become. In 1773, the British government intervened for the first time, passing the Regulating Act to establish some oversight over the company's affairs. It was a turning point, an admission that this was no longer merely a trading matter, but the management of an entire empire. Yet, that oversight was never complete. The company kept strengthening its military and administrative power, and over the following century, one by one, the remaining Indian states fell to the same method that had first been tested in Bengal, either through treaties or through defeat on the battlefield. Tipu Sultan, ruler of Mysore, remembered in history as the Tiger of Mysore, resisted the company for years but ultimately fell in 1799, sacrificing his own life. The Maratha Empire, once India's greatest power, weakened gradually through a series of wars. The Sikh Empire, thrown into internal turmoil after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, eventually bowed before the British as well. Here, a fundamental question arises, one that troubles every student of history. India was not some weak or undeveloped land. This was home to the Mughal Empire, once counted among the richest and most powerful empires on earth, its economy larger than the combined economies of Europe. So, how was it possible that a relatively small trading company, arriving from an island thousands of miles away, came to conquer such a vast land? The answer was never out there. It was hidden within. Aurangzeb died in 1707, and after him, the Mughal Empire declined rapidly. One weak ruler after another took the throne, provincial governors grew independent, and Nadir Shah's invasion of 1,739 devastated Delhi so thoroughly that Mughal grandeur never truly recovered. India was no longer a unified empire. It had fractured into dozens of small states, whose rulers did not trust one another and often plotted against each other instead. Nawabs, Rajas, Sultans, each one obsessed with strengthening his own kingdom. And in pursuit of that goal, many sought British military help without ever realizing they were inviting their own enemy onto their own soil. This is the lesson history repeats again and again, and the lesson that is ignored again and again. Great empires rarely fall to outside force. They fall from the cracks within mistrust, envy, self-interest, and the absence of unity. The East India Company invented no new weapon. It simply walked through the door that the decline of the Mughal Empire and the rivalries of India's own states had already left wide open. In the 100 years following Plassey, what had begun as a trading company slowly transformed into a full-fledged government. The company now had its own courts, its own prisons, its own tax system, and an army of hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers, commanded by British officers, used to conquer more and more of their own homeland. In 1857, a rebellion erupted, one the British called the Mutiny, and Indian history remembers as the First War of Independence, a revolt that shook the company to its foundations. The details of this uprising, its leaders, and its outcome will be the subject of our next episode.